Imagine yourself traveling thousands of years into the past, to the arid and mountainous lands of Israel. Among the many figures in biblical history, one stands out for his unwavering loyalty, yet is tragically forgotten: Ahimelech, the priest of Nob. Have you ever heard of Ahimelech? He wasn't just any priest. He held a position of extreme importance, being responsible for the sanctuary at Nob, where the Ark of the Covenant, Israel's most sacred object, was kept. It was a turbulent time, with King Saul on the brink of madness and David, the young warrior who defeated Goliath, fleeing for his life. Ahimelech lived in an era of tension between kings and prophets, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred. He was a spiritual leader, a mediator between God and his people, but little did he know that by following his divine calling, he would be drawn into the heart of one of the most dramatic and shocking episodes in biblical history. He would be forced to make a choice that would alter the course of his life, and in the process, become the victim of a betrayal no man could have foreseen. Now, prepare yourself to uncover Ahimelech's role in this surprising story, where loyalty and betrayal intertwine in unimaginable ways. Ahimelech was going about his peaceful daily routine in the sanctuary of Nob, unaware that something terrible was about to happen. One morning, amidst the sacred silence of the temple, he noticed a figure approaching quickly. It was David, but not the David everyone knew, the fearless hero, the giant slayer. David looked tired, with a worn face and ragged clothes. Something was deeply wrong. David entered and, without wasting time, explained his situation. He was fleeing from Saul. The king, consumed by envy and suspicion, wanted him dead at any cost. Desperate and without resources, David sought Ahimelech's help. Ahimelech, surprised and suspicious, couldn't understand why the king's favorite, the general of Israel's troops, was there, alone and in trouble. "Why are you alone and no one with you?" Ahimelech asked, concern written across his face. David, trying to protect the priest from Saul's true intentions, made up a story. "The king has sent me on a secret mission and no one must know." Ahimelech hesitated. He felt the weight of the situation, but also saw the desperation in David's eyes. He knew something wasn't right, but his sense of hospitality, and perhaps a feeling that David was innocent, compelled him to act. What he didn't know was that by offering help to the fugitive, he was placing himself directly in the path of Saul's relentless fury. David, now more confident, looks at Ahimelech and makes his request. "I am hungry. I need bread." Ahimelech, still suspicious, surveys the situation. There was no ordinary bread in the sanctuary, only the bread of the presence, reserved exclusively for the priests, a sacred food symbolizing the presence of God. Ahimelech hesitates for a moment, but he sees the urgency in David's eyes. He knew that denying sustenance to a man in need, especially someone like David, would go against the principles of compassion that he, as a priest, was meant to uphold. After pondering, Ahimelech makes the risky decision to break religious protocol. He hands David the sacred bread. But David's request didn't end there. He needed something more. With war all around him and danger at every corner, he needed a weapon. Ahimelech, surprised by the request, knew that the temple was no place for weapons. However, he remembered something. There was a single weapon stored there, a war trophy, the sword of Goliath, the giant that David himself had slain years earlier. The sword still remained in the sanctuary, wrapped in a cloth as a symbol of Israel's victory. Ahimelech, perhaps realizing the irony of fate, brings the sword to David and says, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, is here. If you want it, take it, for there is no other besides this one." David accepts the sword, with food and a weapon in hand. He prepares to continue his flight. Little did Ahimelech know that by granting him these things, he was sealing his own fate. A shadowy witness was watching from afar. As David prepared to leave, a shadowy figure, almost unnoticed, lurked in the background. Doeg the Edomite, chief of Saul's shepherds, was there, watching everything with sharp eyes. He had witnessed every detail: Ahimelech's hesitation, the sacred bread being handed over, and most shockingly, Goliath's sword being entrusted to David. Doeg was loyal to Saul, and his presence at that moment was no coincidence. Ahimelech, perhaps too focused on helping David, didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. To him, Doeg was just another servant on his journey, someone of no great importance. But Doeg's eyes were filled with dangerous intent. He knew that King Saul was obsessed with capturing David, and this information would be the key to gaining even more of the king's favor. As David left Nob, taking the bread and the sword with him, Ahimelech likely believed he had done the right thing, fulfilling his duty before God. But fate was about to take a dark turn. Doeg, with a cold gaze, already knew what he would do next. He wouldn't hesitate to use that moment of mercy and kindness against Ahimelech himself. The betrayal was already in motion, silent and deadly, and the priest of Nob had no idea that his acts of compassion would soon be twisted to bring about his destruction. Doeg, with the information held like a sharp weapon, wasted no time. Upon returning to Saul's court, he recounted everything he had witnessed in Nob. With each word from Doeg's mouth, Saul's anger grew, inflaming into an almost uncontrollable fury. He felt betrayed, convinced that Ahimelech had conspired against him by aiding David, his declared enemy. Saul, his face twisted with hatred, acted swiftly. He immediately summoned Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob to appear before his court. When Ahimelech arrived, unaware of the danger awaiting him, he was met by a king unhinged, consumed by paranoia. "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword, and inquiring of God for him, so that he has risen against me?" Saul roared, his voice echoing through the room. Ahimelech, stunned, stood silent for a moment. He knew he had helped David, but never with any intention of betrayal. With courage and dignity, Ahimelech defended himself. "Who among all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your guard, and honored in your household? Did I begin to inquire of God for him today? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute any guilt to his servant." But Ahimelech's words, filled with truth, did nothing to calm Saul's heart. The king's fury had already passed the point of no return, and his mind was made up. Ahimelech, realizing the gravity of the situation, understood that justice would find no place in this court. He was an innocent man, but innocence would not save him from Saul's cruelty. Saul's eyes were filled with uncontrollable fury. Though Ahimelech had spoken with sincerity and honor, he knew nothing would change the king's mind. The hall grew heavy with silence after the priest's final words. But Saul, deep in his paranoia, was unwilling to listen. He rose from his throne and, without hesitation, issued a command that would shake Israel to its core. "Kill the priests of the Lord, for their hand is also with David. They knew he fled, and did not tell me." Saul's soldiers froze. They served the king, but to kill the priests of the Lord? That was unthinkable, a grave sin. Not one of them dared raise their sword against God's servants. There was a line even the command of a king could not cross. But Doeg the Edomite was there, cold and merciless. He did not share the fear of the Israelite soldiers, driven by blind loyalty to Saul, and perhaps a desire to distinguish himself. Doeg stepped forward without hesitation. With shocking brutality, he carried out the massacre himself. Ahimelech, along with 84 innocent priests, was killed that day in an act of violence as unexpected as it was cruel. The blood of God's servants stained the ground, and the sound of Doeg's sword echoed through the hall like a shadow of despair. But the tragedy didn't end there. Saul, in his cruelty, ordered that the entire town of Nob, the home of the priests, be destroyed. Men, women, children, and even the animals were slaughtered. Ahimelech had not only been betrayed and murdered, but his entire lineage and people paid the price for the madness of a king consumed by power and paranoia. As Abiathar found refuge by David's side, the consequences of the massacre at Nob began to spread like a shadow over Saul's reign. The king's ruthless act would not go unanswered, and Saul's fate was growing increasingly sealed. David, now more aware of Saul's cruelty, also felt the weight of responsibility upon his shoulders. He knew that, in a way, the tragedy at Nob had been triggered by his flight and the help he sought from Ahimelech. Yet, he also knew that Saul, in his paranoid rage, was the true culprit behind the brutality. With Abiathar by his side, David began to chart a new path. He gathered those who remained loyal to him, slowly building resistance against Saul's tyrannical rule. Abiathar, as the sole surviving priest of Nob, now served as David's spiritual advisor, carrying not only the priestly tradition of his family, but also the heavy burden of loss. Saul's days as king of Israel were numbered. The violence he unleashed on the innocent, his growing madness, and his betrayal of those who served God began to erode his authority. The massacre at Nob, in particular, echoed in the hearts of the Israelites, becoming a symbol of Saul's boundless cruelty. As David and Abiathar continued to walk this new path together, the people of Israel began to realize that Saul's reign was stained with innocent blood. Divine justice, though delayed, was inevitable, and the weight of Saul's actions was slowly dragging him toward his own downfall. Over time, David's fury and Abiathar's grief began to transform into a burning determination. They became symbols of hope and resistance for those still living under Saul's tyrannical rule. Although David was still a fugitive, he began organizing, forming an army of loyal men who shared his vision of an Israel free from oppression and the madness of the king. Meanwhile, Saul's reputation continued to crumble under the weight of his own actions. The massacre at Nob had become a stain on his reign, and the Israelites began to question his leadership. Saul's spirit was also in decline, affected by growing despair, and his methods became increasingly brutal as he tried to maintain control. Abiathar, standing by David's side, brought a connection to God that many had lost under Saul's tyranny. He prayed, interceded, and provided spiritual guidance to David's men. Abiathar's presence as a priest not only gave strength to David, but also restored the faith of those seeking redemption. Through a series of strategic encounters, David and his allies began to gather strength, consolidating support and drawing in those oppressed by Saul. The tide was turning. David's courage spread, and the idea of a new leader, a man after God's own heart, began to take root in the spirit of the people. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. In an inevitable confrontation between David's forces and Saul's men, the battle would be more than just a struggle for power. It would be a judgment for the innocent blood that had been spilled. The divine justice that had seemed delayed was now approaching, and the story of Ahimelech and his sacrifice would be remembered not only as an act of betrayal, but as a catalyst for the change that was about to unfold in Israel. The cycle of oppression was about to be broken, and the promise of a new beginning hovered in the air, a renewed hope among the people of God.